When Renata Holt walked into that garage on the coldest Friday in November, no one knew she was worth $4.7 billion. Not the parts supplier unloading boxes at the side door. Not the mechanic apprentice who barely looked up from his phone. And certainly not Liam Doyle, the single father of one, hands blackened with grease, who set down his wrench the moment he saw her standing in the rain like someone the world had already given up on. But she was watching him. She had been for longer than he knew. And in a life that had taught her that every gesture came with a price, Liam Doyle was about to become the one man who proved her wrong. This is their story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. And if this story moves something in you, hit that like button. You'll understand exactly why by the end. Now let me take you back to where it all started. To a Friday evening that looked like every other. To a moment so small, most people would have driven right past it. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight. Not the soft, forgiving kind that softens the ground and smells like earth. This was something harder. Angrier. Sheets of water hammering the corrugated roof of Doyle's auto, drumming like something that had a grievance. The kind of rain that floods gutters and bends trees sideways and makes a man feel like the sky itself is pressing down on him. Liam Doyle didn't notice. He was already somewhere else inside his head. His hands moved out of memory alone. Socket wrench, quarter turn, wipe, a repeat. While the yellow work light above him cast long shadows across the underside of a '09 Silverado that had seen better days. The garage smelled like motor oil and something close to rust. The kind of smell that stays in your clothes no matter how many times you wash them. He'd stopped noticing that years ago, too. He had worked in this garage, his father's garage, now technically his, for 9 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Not that he was counting. He was counting. Because 9 years was also how long he'd been doing this alone. 9 years since Claire left. 9 years since a Tuesday morning with no argument, just a note on the kitchen table and a car seat left in the hallway that still had a juice stain on the strap. Not 9 years of being the one who packed the lunches and signed the field trip forms and sat in the pediatrician's waiting room trying to remember which ear was hurting this time. His daughter, Rosie, was 8 now. She was upstairs above the garage in the small apartment that shared walls with everything. The noise of engines and the silence after. She would be asleep by now, tucked in with the stuffed rabbit missing one eye that she refused to replace. She was the reason his hands kept moving even when the rest of him had nothing left. He didn't hear the car pull in over the rain. He heard the door, though, the creak of it. Slow, like someone unsure whether they had the right to enter. He rolled out from under the truck. She was standing just inside the garage entrance, drenched through. Her coat, cream-colored once, and he could tell, was dark and heavy with water. She was holding her keys so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Her car, a black European sedan, sat at an angle in the lot outside, hazard lights blinking orange in the dark like something desperate. She didn't look like someone who'd ever had to ask for help before. That was the first thing he noticed. And she was asking for it now. That was the second. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was quieter than the rain. "I didn't know where else to stop." Liam Doyle looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he grabbed a shop rag, wiped his hands, and said, "Let me take a look." He didn't think. Thinking would have raised too many questions. Thinking would have reminded him that it was past closing, that he still had an invoice to finish, now that Rosie would be up by 6 and he hadn't eaten since noon. He just moved, because that was the kind of man he was, not because he wanted something, because it was raining and she was stranded and that was simply enough of a reason. She whispered it so quietly he almost missed it. "I'd give everything up," she said, "for one night like this." He stopped, put down his wrench, and looked at her. Liam Doyle's alarm went off at 5:10 every morning. Not 5, not 5:15, 5:10. He'd said it that way years ago for no logical reason, and now the specific wrongness of it felt like his. A small, stubborn claim on a life that often felt like it belonged to everyone else first. He didn't linger in bed. He never had, not even in the years before Rosie, when lingering was still an option. He sat up, placed both feet on the cold floor, bare, on always bare, because socks at night felt like giving in to something, and sat in the dark for exactly the amount of time it took for the ache in his lower back to settle into something manageable. 3 years ago, he'd lifted a transmission wrong. A Dodge Ram, fully loaded, not properly supported on the jack stand. His back made a sound that he still thought about sometimes. He hadn't gone to the doctor. He didn't have the kind of schedule that allowed for a doctor. He got up instead. He always got up. The apartment above the garage had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that fit 1 person comfortably and 2 people if they were careful, and a bathroom where the hot water ran generous for exactly 4 minutes before it turned honest. The walls were thin. On quiet nights, he could hear the wind working its way through the gaps around the window frames with a sound like someone trying to say something important and not quite managing it. He'd painted Rosie's room yellow when she was 3. She'd picked the color herself from a fan of paint swatches at the hardware store. "That one, Daddy, that one," pointing with a certainty he'd envied. The yellow had faded some in the years since, but he hadn't repainted it. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because fading was still hers. Still the choice she'd made with her whole small hand stretched toward something bright. His room was the color walls get when no one makes a decision about them. He showered in under 4 minutes, dressed in the dark. Work pants, a thermal, then his father's old gray Henley that had gone soft at the elbows, and patted down the narrow staircase to the garage below. He unlocked the side door at 5:28. He liked being down there before the day had any expectations of him. Before the phone started. Before the appointments on the whiteboard by the door started having faces. Doyle's auto had belonged to his father, Patrick, before the stroke in 2016. It was a single bay operation, not the kind of shop that had a waiting area with a TV and a coffee machine. It had a plastic chair from a school that had been demolished. A red cooler from 2004 that Liam kept water in, not beer, though sometimes he thought about the beer. The floor was concrete, perpetually stained in dark shapes that were older than he was. The walls had pegboards with tools hung in the silhouettes his father had drawn in black marker, so everything had a place to return to. Liam had kept the outlines exactly as his father had drawn them. He wasn't entirely sure if that was reverence or if he just couldn't bring himself to redraw the lines. He made coffee on a 2-burner hot plate wedged on the shelf beside the register. The machine was older than Rosie. It made a sound in the middle of its cycle like a man clearing his throat before saying something difficult, and then it either delivered or it didn't. This morning, it delivered. He poured a mug, held it in both hands, and stood in the open bay door looking out at the street. The neighborhood was a working one. Not the kind of working that appeared in real estate descriptions. Vibrant, up and coming. The kind that had a tire shop, a pawnbroker, a laundromat that opened at 6, and a diner that had been threatening to close for 11 years but kept not doing it. The kind where people got up early because they had to, not because they'd read somewhere that mornings were productive. Liam had grown up 6 blocks from here. He'd left once, briefly, for 2 years of a mechanical engineering degree he couldn't finish paying for. He'd come back when his father got sick. He'd told himself it was temporary. That was 9 years ago. He didn't regret it. He told himself that often enough that it had stopped feeling like something he needed to say. By 6 o'clock, he had the Silverado from the night before up on the lift and was running a diagnostic. By 7:15, he'd confirmed what the customer had suspected. Cracked flex plate, not a cheap fix, and had left a voicemail with the quote in the flat, even tone he used when the number was going to hurt someone. By 8:30, a Honda Accord had come in for an oil change, and a man named Walt, who drove a 2003 F150 and came in every 4 months like clockwork, had dropped off his keys through the mail slot with a note that just said same as last time. Liam knew what same as last time meant. He always did. At 11:45, he wiped his hands on a rag and climbed the stairs. He made Rosie's lunch even though she was already at school. Habit, started before she was old enough to notice, kept because the ritual of it, the small sandwich cut on a diagonal, the apple quartered, the note in the box that said something ridiculous he'd have to think of while he was cutting. It grounded something in him that nothing else reached. He stood in the kitchen holding the lunchbox for a moment. She had her mother's eyes. He'd made peace with that, or something close enough to peace that he'd stopped examining the difference. He set the lunchbox on the counter and went back down to work. He heard the car before he saw it. Not the engine. The engine had already quit, somewhere out on Ferris Street, which meant she'd been coasting on whatever momentum she had left, steering with both hands and praying the road stayed straight. The sound he heard was the tires, slow and wrong on the wet asphalt, and then the particular silence of a car that has given everything it had and is now simply done. Liam set down his wrench and walked to the bay door. The car was a black Mercedes E-Class, no more than 2 years old, just sitting at an angle across the entrance to his lot like it had tried to make a decision and changed its mind halfway through. The hazard lights were going. Rain was coming down in the thick, indifferent way it had been coming down all week, and it made the orange blink of the hazards look like something distress signaling from the bottom of a lake. He stood there for a moment, watching. The driver's door opened. She stepped out without an umbrella, without hesitation, like the rain was something she simply hadn't accounted for and wasn't going to insult herself by reacting to now. Her coat was the kind of cream-colored wool that you didn't see in this part of town unless someone had taken a wrong turn. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a way that was either very expensive or coming apart at the edges. In the rain and the bad light. How he couldn't tell which. She was somewhere in her late 30s. She moved like someone accustomed to rooms paying attention when she entered. But her hands, when she looked down at her phone, were shaking. She looked up and saw him standing in the bay door. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked toward him across the wet lot, heels on concrete, and stopped just inside the shelter of the garage overhang. She looked at the floor first. An old habit he'd learned later from years of entering rooms and reading them before committing. Then at him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know where else to stop." Her voice was quieter than he'd expected. Controlled, but only just. Liam looked past her at the Mercedes, then back at her. He didn't ask if she was all right. She clearly wasn't. He didn't ask what had happened. He'd find out under the hood. He didn't calculate whether the shop was technically closed, or whether he had another hour of work already waiting, or what time Rosie got out of school. He grabbed a shop rag, wiped his hands, and said, "Let me take a look." He popped the hood. It took him 40 seconds to find it. A coolant hose that had given way at the clamp, the kind of failure that announces itself quietly and then all at once. He'd seen it 100 times on cars half this age. On a car like this one, it meant someone had either skipped a service interval or trusted the wrong shop. "Coolant hose," he said, "split at the fitting. You've got no coolant pressure, which is why she cut out." She came to stand beside him. She looked into the engine bay with the focused attention of someone who was absorbing information. "I'm not waiting to be rescued. Can you fix it tonight?" "I've got the hose in stock, give me an hour." She nodded once. "What do I owe you?" "Let me fix it first." She almost said something to that. He saw it, a flicker, a recalibration, and then she simply nodded again and stepped back. He pulled the car into the bay. She stood near the plastic chair by the wall, didn't sit in it, just stood with her arms folded and her coat dripping quietly onto the concrete. He worked. She didn't fill the silence with unnecessary conversation, which he found he appreciated more than he would have expected. At some point, he asked if she wanted coffee. She said yes, without the pause people sometimes used when they were deciding whether to be polite. He poured her a mug from the hot plate, handed it over without ceremony. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at him over the rim the way people look at things they're trying to figure out. He went back to work. He was 20 minutes in when he heard the side door. "Still here?" The voice belonged to Gil Mercer, who owned the radiator shop 2 doors down and had appointed himself the informal authority on how Liam ran his business. Gil was 54, twice divorced, and had opinions the way some men have allergies, constantly and about everything. He appeared in the doorway with a convenience store coffee and the expression of a man who had already decided what he was looking at. His eyes moved from Liam to the woman, to the Mercedes, back to Liam. "Whose car?" "Customers," Liam said without looking up. Gil stepped inside, because Gil always stepped inside. He made a slow, sort of theatrical survey of the situation. The expensive car, the expensive coat, the woman who was clearly not from around here standing in Liam's garage at nearly 7 in the evening drinking coffee from a camping mug. "You know her?" "She came in off the street. Coolant hose." Gil sipped his coffee. "She paying full rate?" "Gil, I'm just asking, because you've got a habit, Liam, of doing work for people that don't—" "She's a customer," Liam said. His voice stayed flat. "Same as anyone." Gil looked at the woman again. She was looking at her phone now, or pretending to. Her jaw was set in a way that said she had heard every word and was choosing carefully not to respond to any of it. "You're too easy," Gil said, dropping his voice like that made it less audible. "Woman like that's got roadside assistance on speed dial. She's not here because she had to be. She's here because she figured she could get a deal." Liam set down his wrench and turned around. "You need something, Gil? Because I've got work to finish." Gil held up a hand. "Fine, fine." The gesture of a man retreating without admitting he'd been wrong. He finished his coffee in the doorway, said something about the rain, and left. The garage went quiet again. Just the sound of tools and rain and the hose fitting slowly giving way to something that worked. After a long moment, the woman said, very quietly, not to him, almost to herself, "Thank you." He wasn't sure at first whether she meant the car. He didn't ask. She came back the next morning. Liam didn't expect it. He'd handed her the keys at 8:15 the night before, quoted her a price that was fair and not a cent less, and she'd paid it without negotiating. Which told him something, though he wasn't sure what. She'd said thank you again, gotten in the car, and driven away into the rain with the particular straightness of someone who does not look back. He'd thought that was the end of it. But at 9:40 the following morning, the black Mercedes pulled into the lot. She parked carefully, properly this time, and came through the side door holding 2 coffees from the place on Alderman Street, the good one, not the gas station, and set one on the shelf beside his hot plate without a word, like it was a transaction she'd already calculated and closed. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said, and left. He stood there holding the coffee for a moment, looking at the door. Her name, he would learn, was Renata Holt. He learned it not from her, but from the name on the credit card receipt from the night before, which he'd filed in the folder under the counter the way he filed all his receipts, in order, without ceremony. He didn't search for her. He wasn't the kind of man who searched. But the name stayed. She came back Thursday, then the following Monday, each time with a pretext. A noise she thought she'd noticed in the steering column, a question about tire pressure for winter, something minor and fixable in under 5 minutes. Each time he answered the question directly, without making her feel foolish for asking it, and each time she thanked him and left before the conversation could become anything more than it was. He noticed things, in the way that men who work with their hands notice things, through observation rather than intention. And the coffee she brought was always black for him, which meant she'd remembered from the first night, from the mug he'd poured without asking her preference. She never arrived without a purpose stated. She never stayed longer than the purpose required. And she always stood with approximately 4 feet of distance between herself and whoever she was speaking to, like she'd measured it once and decided it was the right amount of world to keep between herself and other people. She was guarded in the way that people are guarded when they've learned that openness costs something they can't afford to keep paying. He understood that, more than she probably knew. 4 years ago, a woman named Claire Doyle had sat across from him at their kitchen table, the same table where Rosie now did her homework, and told him, in the measured tone of someone who had rehearsed this, that she loved him, but that love wasn't the same thing as a life. That she'd tried to want the garage and the apartment and the neighborhood and the particular smallness of everything, and she couldn't make herself want it no matter how long she waited for the feeling to arrive. She hadn't been cruel about it. That was almost harder. Cruelty would have given him somewhere to put the anger. Instead, she'd been honest, and honest had left him with nothing to push against. Just a note on the table and a car seat in the hallway, and a 3-year-old who asked where Mama was for 6 months before she stopped asking, which was somehow worse than the asking. He'd learned, in the years since, to read the distance in people early, to not build anything against a wall that wasn't his to lean on. He was careful. Deliberately, consciously careful, in the way that a man is careful after he's learned that careful is the only thing standing between him and a particular kind of grief. So he noticed Renata Holt. And he said nothing about noticing. The Tuesday she met Rosie was an accident. He'd miscalculated the school pickup time against a brake job that ran long, and rather than leave the car half-finished, he'd called Mrs. Pacheco next door to walk Rosie the 2 blocks home. Rosie had her own key. She was 8, and she knew the rules. Come straight up, lock the door, do not open it for anyone except Dad or Mrs. Pacheco, and do not, under any circumstances, come down to the garage while he had a car on the lift. She came down to the garage. She appeared in the side doorway at 3:52 in her school backpack and her yellow rain jacket and one of her shoelaces untied, carrying the stuffed rabbit by one ear the way she always carried it when she wasn't at school, and she stopped when she saw the woman. Renata was standing near the shelf, waiting for Liam to finish printing an invoice. She turned when she heard the door. They looked at each other, the woman and the child, with the frank, unfiltered assessment that only one of them still had the freedom to use. "Hi," Rosie said. "Hello," Renata said. "I'm Rosie. My dad owns this." She gestured at the garage with the authority of someone whose name wasn't on anything but who understood ownership at a molecular level. "I know," Renata said. "He fixed my car." Rosie considered this. She came further into the garage, which Liam noticed from the corner of his eye and chose not to address yet, because something in the air felt delicate in a way he couldn't name. "Is it a good car?" Rosie asked. "It was having a problem." "My dad can fix anything," Rosie said, with the particular confidence of a child who has only ever seen one person solve every problem that has ever appeared in her life. Then she tilted her head and looked at Renata the way children look at things they're genuinely trying to understand. "Are you sad?" The garage went very quiet. Renata blinked. It was the smallest movement, just the eyes, but Liam caught it from across the room. "Why do you ask that?" Renata said. Her voice was careful, gentle even, in a way it hadn't been with him. Rosie shrugged with one shoulder. "You look like you're thinking about something that isn't here." Liam set down the invoice. He looked at his daughter, then at the woman. Renata was looking at Rosie with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Something had moved behind it. Something she hadn't planned for. "Maybe a little," she said quietly. Rosie nodded, like that was a completely reasonable answer, and then held out the rabbit. "You can hold Percy if you want. He helps." For 3 full seconds, Renata Holt, who ran a company with 400 employees, who had sat across from senators and did not flinch, who kept 4 feet of distance between herself and the rest of the world, looked at a one-eyed stuffed rabbit being offered by an 8-year-old and said nothing. Then she reached out and took it, both hands, carefully, like it was something that mattered. She came back on a Thursday evening when the rain had finally stopped. It was the first dry evening in 11 days, and the absence of it changed the quality of everything. The air, the light, the particular silence of a neighborhood that had been holding its breath underwater for nearly 2 weeks and could now exhale. The street outside the garage was still wet, still reflecting the orange of the street lamps in long, wavering columns. But the sky had opened up into something almost clear, and you could see the edge of it going dark blue in the west the way it does in November when the cold is honest about itself. Liam was locking up. Rosie was already upstairs, fed and bathed and working through a chapter book about a girl who trained falcons, which she'd described to him at dinner with an intensity that suggested she was considering falconry as a career path. He'd made a mental note not to mention this to her teacher. He heard the car. He knew it by now. The particular idol of the Mercedes, the way she parked with the same careful deliberateness every time, like parking was a thing worth doing correctly. He waited. She came around the side of the building on foot, hands in the pockets of a different coat tonight. Darker, heavier, less conspicuous. She stopped when she saw he was locking up. "I can come back," she said. "It's fine," he said. "What do you need?" She looked at him for a moment, then quietly. "Nothing. From the car, I mean. Nothing from the car." He held the door open. She came inside. He didn't turn on the full garage lights. The car was put away. The bay was closed, but the work table light was still on, the old articulated lamp his father had used, throwing a small warm circle across the metal surface. He put the hot plate on. It made its throat-clearing sound and then committed. She sat on the edge of the workbench, which surprised him. Not the plastic chair. The workbench itself, among the tools, like she'd decided the 4 feet of distance was a policy she was temporarily suspending. He poured 2 mugs and handed her one without asking. She held it in both hands. The steam rose between them. For a while, neither of them said anything. It wasn't uncomfortable. That was the thing that caught him. That the silence between them had stopped being a gap and had become something else. Something that didn't need to be filled. And then she said, "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Not ask." She looked at the mug. "Every time. You never ask what I take in my coffee. You never ask why I keep coming back. You never ask what I'm actually doing here. You just..." She stopped. "You just make room." Liam leaned against the workbench on the opposite side. He thought about it honestly because she'd asked it honestly. "I figure people tell you what they need when they're ready," he said. "Asking before, that just makes them have to manage you on top of whatever else they're already managing." She looked up at him then. Really looked. The way she hadn't quite let herself before. "Who taught you that?" "Nobody," he said. "I learned it the other way, from people who asked before I was ready." She was quiet for a moment. "Your wife?" He didn't flinch. "Ex-wife, yeah, go among others." He turned the mug in his hands. She wasn't cruel about it. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She just wanted something I wasn't and couldn't make myself be. And I kept getting asked. By her family, by people who thought they were helping. "Why can't you just..." Whatever it was. More ambitious, more social, more interested in the kind of life they could picture. He paused. After a while, the asking starts to feel like a verdict. Renata said nothing, but something in her posture had shifted. The very precise way she held herself, the architecture of her composure, had changed by some small, unmeasurable degree. "I know that word," she said quietly. "Verdict." He waited. She looked at the lamp, at the small, warm circle it made on the work table, at the tools hung in his father's outlines on the pegboard behind it. "I built something," she said. "From nothing. Genuinely from nothing. I don't mean the kind of nothing that still had a safety net under it. I mean nothing." She said it without pride, just as a fact, the way you state coordinates. And somewhere along the way, the thing I built became the only thing anyone could see when they looked at me. Not... She stopped again. Started differently. "There's no one in my life who talks to me the way your daughter talked to me last week." "She asks everyone if they're sad," Liam said. She asked the mailman once. What did he say? He said, yeah, actually, a little. And she told him Percy helped. He paused. He seemed better after. Something happened to Renata's face then. Not a smile exactly. Something underneath a smile. And something that had been waiting behind all that controlled precision for long enough that when it moved slowly, like a thing that had forgotten it was allowed. She offered me the rabbit, Renata said. I know, she told me. Did she say anything else? Liam looked at her. She said you held it like it was real. The lamp hummed between them. Outside, the wet street reflected light in long, still columns. The rain was gone. The air through the gap in the side door smelled like cold and concrete and something almost clean. Renata set her mug down. She looked at her hands. Both of them, open on the workbench, like she was reading something written there that she wasn't sure she recognized. I don't remember the last time something was just... She searched for it. Just offered, without a reason attached. Rosie doesn't do reasons, Liam said. She just does things. She gets that from somewhere. He didn't answer that, but he didn't look away either. The lamp threw its warm circle. The street outside went still, and for the first time since she'd coasted into his lot on a broken hose and a prayer, Renata Holt sat in a room with another person and did not calculate the cost of being there. She didn't come on Friday. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped. Not immediately, not with alarm, but with a low, creeping awareness that something that had become part of the background was no longer there. He'd grown used to the particular rhythm of her arrivals. The way the Mercedes announced itself before she appeared, and the way she always came with a pretext that fooled neither of them anymore. By Friday afternoon, he caught himself glancing at the lot entrance twice without meaning to, and both times felt faintly ridiculous about it. He didn't say anything. There was no one to say anything to. Saturday passed. He took Rosie to the hardware store in the morning because she'd decided, with the iron certainty of an 8-year-old who has read too many books, that they needed a bird feeder. He bought the bird feeder. He let her pick the seed. On the walk home, she asked him, without preamble, the way she asked everything. Is the lady coming back? What lady? She gave him the look she'd inherited from no one he could identify, the one that meant she knew he knew exactly what she meant. I don't know, he said, which was honest. Rosie considered this. I think she will, she said. She held Percy for a really long time. He didn't respond to that, but he carried it. Sunday, nothing. Monday, nothing. By Tuesday, 8 days since she'd sat on his workbench and held her hands open and said, I don't remember the last time something was just offered. Liam had stopped glancing at the lot entrance and started doing something quieter and more honest, which was worrying. Not the loud kind of worrying. The kind that lives below thought, in the chest, that makes a man move through his ordinary day with something slightly displaced inside him, like a tool returned to the wrong outline on the pegboard. Everything in place. Nothing quite right. He didn't have her number. He hadn't asked. She hadn't offered. That had seemed reasonable at the time. They were not people who had exchanged numbers. They were a mechanic and a woman whose car he'd fixed. And now it seemed like an omission he couldn't correct and hadn't earned the right to regret. He ran the brake job on Walt's truck. He ordered parts for a Subaru coming in Thursday. He made Rosie's lunches and read 2 chapters of the Falcon book aloud after dinner and helped with a worksheet on fractions that required him to actually think, which he appreciated. He did all of it with the competence of someone who had learned over 9 years to keep moving regardless of what was happening inside. But he thought about her, not in the way he would have been embarrassed to admit to anyone. Not with longing exactly, or not only that, with something more like concern. She had sat in his garage and told him without quite saying it that she was alone in a specific and costly way, that the thing she'd built had become a wall she lived inside of. that no one in her life talked to her like Rosie had talked to her. And then she had disappeared, and he had no way of knowing whether she was all right. He told himself she was fine. She was a woman with a $90,000 car and a coat that cost more than his monthly rent. She had resources and infrastructure and entire categories of support that he would never have access to. She was fine. He didn't believe it. Wednesday morning, Gil appeared in the side doorway at 8:15 with his convenience store coffee and an expression that meant he had information he was going to deliver whether Liam wanted it or not. "Your lady friend," Gil said. Liam set down his wrench. "She's not—" I know. Gil waved it off. "I saw her name. On the side of that building they're putting up on Crane Street. The new one, the commercial development. Holt something. Holt Capital." He said the name carefully. The way people say names they've just learned are more significant than they realized. "I looked it up. Renata Holt. Liam, she runs a real estate development company. She's been in the business press. She's not—" He paused, recalibrating. "She's not who I thought she was." Liam said nothing. "I'm just saying, the way I talked about her that first night, forget it, Gil. I'm trying to apologize. I know, forget it." Gil stood there a moment longer, in the way of a man who has more to say and knows he shouldn't say it. Then he left. Liam stood in the middle of the garage floor and looked at the empty lot through the bay door. Holt Capital. And he knew the building on Crane Street. He'd driven past it a dozen times, watched the steel go up over the past year, noticed the name on the hoarding without it meaning anything. It meant something now. It meant that the woman who'd sat on his workbench with both hands open, saying she couldn't remember the last time something was simply offered. That woman had her name on the side of buildings. He didn't know what to do with that. So he picked up his wrench and went back to work, because that was what he knew how to do when he didn't know what else to do. Thursday morning, at 7:52, a car pulled into the lot. Not the Mercedes, a dark sedan, different make, and two people inside, both in suits, both moving with the deliberate efficiency of people who are somewhere professionally and not by accident. And they came through the side door together. The woman in front was perhaps 45, carrying a leather portfolio, her face composed into the particular neutrality of someone trained to deliver news of consequence without editorializing. "Liam Doyle?" "Yeah. My name is Petra Vance. I'm an attorney." She produced a card and held it out. The cardstock was heavy. "I represent Renata Holt. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." The garage went very quiet. Liam's first thought was Rosie. His second thought, arriving a half-second behind it like something he'd been avoiding, was that the urgent matter had something to do with why Renata had stopped coming, and that the reason the attorney was standing in his garage instead of Renata herself meant that whatever had happened, Renata couldn't come herself. "Is she all right?" he said. Petra Vance looked at him. Something moved briefly across her professional composure. Not surprise exactly, but a recognition of something she hadn't expected. "Mr. Doyle," she said carefully, "that's what I'm here to talk to you about." Petra Vance set her portfolio on the workbench and opened it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had delivered difficult news in difficult places before and had learned that the best way through it was directly. "Ms. Holt has been hospitalized," she said. 9 days ago, a cardiac event. She's stable and she's receiving care, but she has been—" a precise pause. "She has been largely unreachable. By choice." Liam stood very still. "She asked me to come here," Petra continued. "Specifically here. She was clear about that." "Why?" Petra looked at him with the careful attention of someone taking a measurement. "Because she wanted you to know, and because she wanted to give you something before—" She stopped. Started again. She wanted to make sure certain things were in order. The garage felt suddenly smaller. Liam was aware of the oil stain on the floor his father had made in 1998 and never cleaned up. He was aware of the tools on the pegboard and their hand-drawn outlines. He was aware that his hands were clean. He'd washed them when the car pulled in, a reflex, and that he didn't know what to do with them. "How serious?" he said. Not a question. A request for honesty. Serious enough that she's made decisions she had been putting off. Petra reached into the portfolio. She wanted me to give you this first." She held out an envelope. It was cream-colored, heavier than ordinary paper, the kind of envelope that understood its own weight. His name was on the front in handwriting that was precise and slightly left-leaning. Not printed, written. He took it. He didn't open it immediately. He was aware of Petra standing there, and of the other man from the car who had stayed near the door, and of Gil Mercer who had appeared in the side doorway at some point, drawn by the sedan, by the suits, by the particular frequency of something significant happening, and was now standing very still and very quiet in a way that Gil almost never was. "Take your time," Petra said. He walked to the far end of the workbench under the lamp his father had used. He turned the envelope over once. Then he opened it. The letter was 3 pages. Handwritten, all of it, in the same precise left-leaning script. "Liam, I've started this 4 times. Each time I got as far as explaining and then realized that explaining first was the wrong order. So I'm going to start with what I should have said when I was sitting on your workbench with my hands open and no idea what to do with the fact that I wasn't afraid. I have been afraid, consistently, for 11 years. Not of failure. I know how to fail. I've done it. It's survivable. Afraid of the other thing. The one that doesn't have a clean name. The one that feels like standing in a room full of people who need something from you and realizing that not one of them is actually looking at you. I built Hold Capital from $11,000 in a storage unit in 4 years of not sleeping. I don't say that for credit. I say it because it's the context for what I'm trying to tell you. When you build something from nothing, the building becomes the thing people see, not you, the building. And after long enough, you start to wonder if there's still a difference. I came to your garage because my car broke down. That part is true and ordinary, and I want you to know I didn't plan anything beyond it. But you opened the door and didn't ask me to explain myself, and you made coffee without asking how I took it because you'd already remembered, and you sent me away with a fair price and no theater. And I drove home and sat in my car in the parking structure of my building for 22 minutes because I couldn't remember the last time a transaction had felt like something a human being did for another human being. So I came back. And you let me, without making it strange. Your daughter asked me if I was sad. I have had assistants and advisors and attorneys and a therapist I see on Wednesdays, and not one of them has asked me that question with that face, with that kind of ordinary, uncalculated care. She offered me a rabbit. I held it for, I don't know how long, longer than made sense. And what I felt, holding it, was something I haven't felt in a very long time, which is that I was just a person in a room being offered something because another person thought it might help. You gave me that too. Every time. Without once making me feel like I owed you the explanation for why I needed it. I want you to know what that was worth. Not in the way I'm about to tell you. The other way. The way that doesn't have a number. It was worth everything, Liam. You treated me like I was just a person whose car had broken down in the rain. In 11 years, with everything I've built and everything I've become, I don't think anyone has done me a greater kindness than that. Now the other thing, because Petra will be waiting and she is not a patient woman. I have placed in trust, effective immediately, a sum of $2.1 million designated for the education, care, and future of your daughter, Rosie. A separate allocation covers this property, the garage, the building, the lot. Transferred to your name, clear of any debt or encumbrance. These are not loans. They are not conditional. They are not something you need to feel complicated about, though I imagine you will anyway. I am not dying. I want to be clear. My cardiologist is cautiously optimistic, which in medical language means he thinks I'll be fine and doesn't want to jinx it. But I have been putting these decisions off for years because putting things off felt like a form of control, And lying in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning has a way of clarifying how wrong that is. You asked for nothing. That's why I'm giving you everything I can. Tell Rosie that Percy worked. Renata Liam stood under the lamp for a long time after he finished reading. He was aware, distantly, of Gil making a sound near the door. Of Petra giving Gil a look that silenced him completely, which was something Liam would remember later as its own small miracle. He was aware of the letter in his hands, 3 pages of precise left-leaning script, and of the weight of it. Not the paper, the other weight. The kind that settles into the sternum when something recontextualizes everything that came before it. The coffee she'd brought that first morning. Black, no sugar. Because she'd remembered. The 4 feet of distance. The pretexts. The way she'd held Percy with both hands, carefully, like it was something that mattered. I don't remember the last time something was just offered. He'd heard it when she said it. He hadn't understood then the full dimension of what she meant. He understood it now. 11 years of building something enormous and standing alone inside it. Coming to his garage not because her car broke down. The car was incidental, a door. But because something in the ordinary plainness of how he'd treated her had been, without his knowing, exactly what she had been starving for. He folded the letter carefully, put it back in the cream envelope. When he turned around, Gil was no longer in the doorway. He was standing just inside the garage, hat in his hands, with an expression Liam had never seen on him. Something stripped of its usual editorial confidence. Something almost small. "Liam," he said, "I'm sorry. For what I said. That first night." "I know," Liam said. It wouldn't have mattered," Liam said quietly. "It didn't matter then either. That's the point." Gil was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Slowly, like a man filing something away in a part of himself he didn't often access. Petra was watching Liam with the careful attention she'd worn since she arrived. She wanted to know, Petra said, if you would consider visiting. When she's ready. There's no obligation attached to that. But she was very specific about the no obligation. Liam looked at the envelope in his hands, at the name on the front in its precise left-leaning script. "Tell her," he said, "that I'll bring coffee." Something moved across Petra Vance's professional composure, brief, unguarded, and entirely human. "I'll tell her," she said. Petra left him with a card, a folder of documents he wasn't ready to open, and a caution delivered in the measured tone of someone who had seen what money did to people who hadn't expected it. "Ms. Holt asked me to say one thing before I go," she said at the door. "Don't tell anyone yet. Not until the paperwork clears, not until you've had time to think. People change when they find out. She wanted you to have some time before they do." Liam nodded. "She also said..." Petra paused, and for just a moment the professional neutrality thinned enough to show something underneath it. "She said you'll probably try to give some of it back, or argue that it's too much. She said to tell you that she's a very stubborn woman and she'll win, so you should save yourself the energy." Despite everything, the letter still in his hand, the folder on the workbench, the number in his head that he couldn't yet make feel real. Something in Liam's chest moved in a direction that wasn't grief. "She's not wrong," he said. "No," Petra agreed. "She rarely is." Then she was gone. The sedan pulled out of the lot with quiet efficiency, and the garage went still. Gil had disappeared sometime during Petra's closing remarks, with an uncharacteristic absence of commentary that was its own form of respect. The lot was empty. The street beyond it was doing its ordinary Thursday morning things. A delivery truck, a woman with a stroller, the distant sound of the tire shop's air compressor cycling on. The world, apparently, was continuing. Liam stood in the middle of his garage floor and looked at the folder on the workbench. He didn't open it. Not yet. He wasn't sure he was the right version of himself yet to open it. That it required some preparation he hadn't figured out how to do. He thought about his father. About Patrick Doyle standing in this same garage in 1987 with the outline of a wrench drawn in black marker on a pegboard, making a place for everything, making sure everything had somewhere to return to. His father had worked this floor for 31 years and never once, to Liam's knowledge, considered himself owed anything by it. He just worked. Carefully, consistently, with the particular dignity of a man who knew exactly what he was and had made his peace with it. Liam had inherited the garage. He'd inherited the outlines on the pegboard. He'd inherited, without meaning to, the posture of a man who expected nothing and gave what he had anyway. He wondered what his father would say right now. He suspected it would be something unhelpfully practical. "Check the paperwork, son. Make sure it's real." He almost laughed. Almost. Then he looked at the clock on the wall. 11:48. Rosie got out at 3:15. He had a Subaru coming in at 1 o'clock. A routine service, oil and filter, maybe an hour's work. He had lunch to make. She'd asked for the cheese and tomato, the one he cut on the diagonal. He had a Falcon book with 4 chapters left that they were reading together after dinner. And last night she'd made him promise not to read ahead, which he had also promised to Mrs. Pacheco at pickup, because Rosie had told Mrs. Pacheco as a form of insurance. He had, in other words, a day. The same day he'd had this morning when he woke up at 5:10 and put his bare feet on the cold floor. The number in the folder didn't change the day. It didn't change the Subaru or the diagonal cut, or the 4 chapters or the particular specific weight of Rosie asleep in the yellow room above him while he studied until midnight. It changed what came after. It changed the horizon. But the day was still the day. He put the folder carefully in the locked drawer under the register. His father's drawer, the one with the good lock where Patrick had kept the important papers. And he went to the hot plate and made coffee. He drank it standing in the bay door looking out at the ordinary Thursday street, the way he did every morning, the way he had done for 9 years, 3 months, and some number of days he had stopped counting. Then he went to make Rosie's lunch. He cut the sandwich on the diagonal. He quartered the apple. He put a note in the box that said, in his handwriting, the careful block letters he used so she could read it herself. "Percy says hi." He looked at it for a moment. Added, "So does your dad. Have a good day, Bug." He set the lunchbox by the door. At 3:15, when the doors of PS 47 burst open and children poured out into the cold afternoon, Rosie spotted him immediately, the way she always did, as if she had a frequency tuned specifically to him and no weather or crowd or noise could interfere with it. Her face did the thing it always did. The sunrise thing. The thing that cost her nothing and gave him everything. "Dad." He crouched down to her level. She was wearing the yellow jacket. Her shoelace was untied again. "Hey, Bug. You came yourself today." "I always come." She accepted this as the simple truth it was and leaned into him briefly, the way she'd done since she was small, the full weight lean of a child who trusts completely. He held on for a moment longer than usual. She didn't notice, or she did, and didn't say anything, which with Rosie sometimes meant the same thing. On the walk home, she talked about the Falcons, about a chapter they'd read at school, about a boy named Freddie who'd said something at lunch that she'd found philosophically questionable and was still processing. He listened to all of it, every word, the way he always did, because she was 8 and the world was still the size of her school and her lunch table and her book about falcons, and that was the right size for it to be, and he would keep it that size for as long as he possibly could. Then she looked up at him, mid-sentence about Freddie, and said, "Is the lady going to be okay?" He looked down at her, at the hazel eyes she'd gotten from her mother, at the certainty she carried everywhere, bright and undamaged. "Yeah," he said, "I think she is." Rosie nodded, satisfied. "Good. She needs Percy more." "She said to tell you Percy worked." Rosie considered this with great seriousness. Then she smiled. The full one, the one with the gap where a tooth had been since October. I know, she said. He always does. They walked home through the cold. The street was the same street, and the building was the same building. The elevator was still broken, and they climbed the 4 flights the way they always did, Rosie counting each step aloud in a different language she'd invented that had no consistent rules. Inside, the walls were the yellow she'd chosen when she was 3. Faded now, but still hers. Still the color of a small hand stretched toward something bright. Liam stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it for a long moment. Then he started dinner.